Alright, chapter 1 is going to be a general introduction about what biology is. Well, biology, the definition, is just how we study life in general. And within life, there's different properties of life that we'll go into in just a few seconds here. First of all, there's this order or organization within living beings. So as you can see this pine cone here, there's a certain order to it. And also how like our human bodies are organized in a certain way, with our hearts being at our middle of our chest, and where our heads are at and whatnot. Homeostasis, also known as regulation, is how we adjust to the external environment. So this is the adjusting of our internal environment in comparison to what's happening on the outside of us. So for example, here's this lizard here, and it's sunbathing to try to increase its temperature. And how we kind of do it in ourselves, in human beings. I gave the example in class where if it's cold, we're going to shiver, our muscles are going to contract to try to raise our body temperature. Well, if it's getting hot, what happens is that we begin to sweat. That sweat will then cause evaporation, causing our bodies to cool down. And also our blood vessels towards the outer surface of our skin and towards basically the superficial or outer parts of our body, those blood vessels are going to vasodilate. They're going to open up to release the temperature within our blood towards the environment as well. There's also growth and development as another property of life. So like every living thing, they will have them to grow in size and also develop in different type of cells and structures. So the DNA controls both this growth and development. For metabolism, that's yet another property of life. This is how we process energy. So of course we're always taking in energy so that we could then expend it on to make energy. So as this puffin is demonstrating, it's eating fish, and this after consuming this fish, it will be able to get energy from it to make ATP, as we'll later learn in cellular respiration. And how plants, they get energy from the sunlight energy and converts it into chemical energy. Then there's also a response to an environment. So all living things, they will be able to respond to environmental stimulus. So as this Venus flytrap is responding to something that is triggering these sensors that will detect movement, and once it detects that, Venus flytrap will then close, entrapping the insect inside of it. So like anything, like even our knee-jerk reflex, when you apply some sort of stimulus at our patella ligament, if you use a hammer and hit that, then it's going to cause the knee to contract and allow it to kick out our foot, and that's kind of the response to the stimulus of hitting that patella ligament. Yet another property of life is reproduction. So all living things, they will be able to reproduce so that they could pass down their genetic material to the next generation. And then there's evolution. Evolution is just how a population, we'll later learn that a population is all the same species, with all the individuals within the same species, and how that changes over a period of time. Unlike what you see here with the Pokemon evolution, it does not happen in a single individual. It's for the entire population of those species to evolve, and it doesn't happen instantaneously or getting some amount of experience points or anything like that, but occurs over a long stretch of time usually. As shown as this insect here, how it has adapted to its environment by looking more like leaves so that it could prevent it from getting eaten by predators. In like the first property of life, we said that there was some sort of order or organization. So this is going to go into how organized the just all life has. It starts off as the smallest particle of matter, which are atoms, as shown over here, which is a carbon molecule. And then, of course, when you have multiple atoms to form, they end up forming a molecule here. And see how there's this carbon atom over here, and if you have other atoms involved as well, they'll form a molecule, and this is a DNA molecule as shown here. Organelles is the next step of organization. Here we see a nucleus. We'll later, when we learn about the cell, we'll learn more different types of organelles as well. The organelle, for the sake of this chapter, all you need to know is just one of the components within the cell, and it has a particular function. The nucleus, it actually stores the DNA as we were showing in that last picture. The cell, not that particular cell, but an actual cell like this muscle cell here, this is a cardiac muscle cell. It is the smallest unit of life. It carries out, it is a living cell and carries out certain functions of it. When you have multiple cells that performs a function, this cardiac muscle cell will become cardiac tissues. And that's when tissues are just all the similar cells that perform that particular function. Now, of course, if I talk about the cardiac tissue, we're talking about the heart itself. So the heart is made out of cardiac tissue, and so organs are made up of different types of tissues that have a particular function. And remember how the heart's function is to contract, right? So that it pumps out blood, so it provides it to our lungs and also to the rest of our body. The organ system is when you have multiple organs performing a function. In this picture here, we have the heart and also all the blood vessels that goes outward and towards the heart too. An organism, on the other hand, is when you have all the different types of organ systems together that completes the individual. So not only do we have the cardiovascular system, as we were shown in the last picture here, but we now have the nervous system, we have the integumentary system, so on and so forth, just to complete this individual, this iguana. And when you have multiple of the individuals of the same species, like I said earlier, that's the definition of a population. Now when you have multiple populations involved, not just one single species, now different species, as you can see these crabs and this iguana interacting together within an area, that's going to form a community. When you have all the living organisms within a given area, so not only the crabs, iguana, but also like some of the non-living factors or abiotic factors like the water here and the air, now we have an ecosystem. And biosphere, finally, is when you have all the different types of environments on Earth forming the Earth itself. Okay, so we did already mention how the cell is the smallest unit of life. There are different types of cells. There's first of the type that I want you to know is the prokaryotic cell. The prokaryotic cell, these cells do not have any membrane-bound organelles. Remember, the organelles are just small components within the cells that carry out a function. So instead of having these membrane-bound organelles, you can see how the DNA is just concentrated in this nucleoid region. Remember how we talked about in the last slide, the nucleus of that animal cell had actually DNA inside of that nucleus. Over here, this prokaryotic cell here does not have a nucleus. It just has this region where the DNA is concentrated called the nucleoid region. So an example of a prokaryotic cell are bacteria. Eukaryotic cells, on the other hand, have these membrane-bound organelles, like we said earlier, like the nucleus, as shown over here. And there's also other organelles that we'll go into when we talk more about the cell. There's also this term called taxonomy, which is just how we group organisms based on the different types of or similar characteristics within the organisms to help us organize and group them together. So there are different types of domains that we group organisms together based on their characteristics. The first one domain is the bacteria, and we already mentioned how the bacteria are prokaryotic cells. Similarly to the bacteria are the archaea and that domain. This archaea domain are also prokaryotic cells. However, they differ from the bacteria only because they have a different evolutionary line than the bacteria itself. And then we already mentioned how the eukaryotes are from this eukarya domain, and these are organisms that have these eukaryotic cells. There are different kingdoms now. Now it's broken up into smaller groups now. There's kingdom Plantae, and these are the producers that undergo photosynthesis, converting light energy into chemical energy. And then we have a group of kingdom fungi. These are mostly decomposers that will end up using dying or decaying plant or animal life and then decompose them into inorganic material. The kingdom Animalia, these are the animals. So we are part of this kingdom here. And these end up consuming other organisms, whether it's the Plantae, kingdom Plantae or producers, or other consumers as well. Finally, we have this kind of miscellaneous group. This is the kingdom Protista. Usually they're mostly single-celled organisms, but they don't really fit in any particular other of the kingdoms that we just mentioned. So it's a separate kingdom compared to the other ones that we just talked about. Okay, another organizational of biology, we talked about ecosystem. Remember how ecosystem, we are not only talking about all the different species living together in a particular area, we're also talking about the abiotic or non-living factors within that area as well. So ecosystems, they depend on different things. One is the recycling of chemical nutrients. And this recycling of chemical nutrients first starts off with the producers, like this grass over here. And these producers end up converting the light energy from the sun into a chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis in this process here. So here is a little animation where we have the light energy from the sun. And here's this little plant that comes bouncing towards us, and it's going to convert that light energy into chemical energy. Here we have a molecule of glucose, which is a carbohydrate. And this carbohydrate will help provide consumers energy to be able to make energy themselves. So the consumers, like the sheep here, grazing on this grass, it feeds on these producers or potentially other consumers. Of course, sheep, they don't really eat other animals per se, but they're mostly eating the grass here. And they feed on the producers to provide this energy. So here we have Kirby here as being one of the consumers, consuming the producer, and then that provides energy, mechanical energy, for it to fly away. And now he left a little present for us, and this present is the waste that that Kirby produced, and this waste will then be utilized by organisms that break them down, whether it's a waste provided from living animals or consumers, or even some waste from plants as well. But it could be also decaying or dying or dead animals and plants as well. So these are decomposers that will break down the waste and dead organisms or dying organisms into inorganic material. And these decomposers will provide the inorganic materials for producers to utilize to undergo photosynthesis again. Second, besides this nutrient flow, we have an energy flow as well. And this energy flow has different laws to it. The first one is called the first law of thermodynamics. And this law is just showing you that energy is not created or destroyed. So what happens is that one type of energy actually converts into a different type of energy. So we mentioned how photosynthesis converts light energy into chemical energy through photosynthesis. Okay, so since we said that neither energy is created or destroyed, the second law of thermodynamics actually talks about how heat is actually released for each conversion of energy. So when light converts to chemical energy, some of it is lost. It's not destroyed, but it's lost as heat energy. And this also increases the disorder of things called entropy. So here's the animation again. Here we have light energy. We have the plant here undergoing photosynthesis to make chemical energy. And during this process, due to the second law of thermodynamics, it's going to release some heat energy as well. And of course, when Kirby comes here and eats the plant, it will then convert that mechanical energy into chemical energy into mechanical energy. So when it flies away, it's converting the chemical energy it consumed into mechanical energy. And once again, since this is a conversion of the energy, some heat is going to be released as well. Evolution. We kind of mentioned a little bit of evolution about one of the properties of life. And once again, it's when a population, remember what a population is? It's the group of the same species with a group of individuals of the same species. And evolution is just how the population changes over a period of time. And once again, it's not like the Pokemon here, but this is more how evolution goes about, where there's an ancestral organism of a particular species, and then some sort of change causes them over time to differentiate from each other and turn into different species. And then finally, at the very end, we have all these different species here. One way of how evolution occurs is through natural selection. And natural selection is how the natural process of a population changes over time. So this is when some are more successfully in passing down traits to than other organisms within the same species. So here we have this beetles where some of them are white and some of them are dark. And notice how the environment in here is a dark environment. So those that are a little whiter in color are going to be picked off by predators like this bird here. And these birds will, after picking them off, these white beetles are not going to be able to pass down their traits to further offsprings. So it makes the darker beetles to have more successful offsprings producing. Sorry, the dark beetles are able to produce offspring more successfully, passing down their traits to their offsprings. And gradually, the traits for white beetles are going to decrease less and less, and eventually there will be little to no white beetles in the end. So this is the natural selection within the natural environment, how it selects a particular certain traits to be passed on into their offspring. And then there's something called artificial selection, which is different from natural selection due to humans being involved in this process. Excuse me. So humans, they end up selecting particular traits that they want. So like this wild mustard here, when humans selected different parts of the wild mustard plant, it ended up forming different food items that we currently eat, such as the cauliflower from just the flower portion of it, of this wild mustard. So over time, after breeding it, using human interventions in breeding this, we then end up producing different types of species of plants for our own benefit. Same thing as with domesticated dogs. The gray or wild dogs, the gray wolves here are wild dogs, we end up breeding them to eventually form the different types of domesticated dogs that we currently have. Finally, I want to talk about the scientific method, and this is how all biology is usually done, and then how we end up finding different types of discoveries through this scientific method and to be accepted within the scientific community. So this is how we just do this testing of our hypothesis, usually made from observations that we've made. So we begin with observations, things that we actually see within the environment, and then that's going to help us develop some questions or try to identify some sort of problem from that environment. And then once we then make those observations and have those questions, we're going to develop a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is kind of like an educated guess or explanation of what we just observed. And then with this hypothesis, we're going to first develop a test so that we can perform an experiment on it. So this experimentation where we test the hypothesis. So after testing the hypothesis, we then collect the data that was gained through the experimentation. And then through that data, we're going to run it through a statistical analysis or analyze that data either quantitatively or qualitatively. Quantitatively is through numbers, like through statistics and stuff. And qualitatively, on the other hand, is through visual observation, things that we can actually see. And through this data analysis, we come up with different results, and we look at the results and see whether or not the hypothesis was accepted or rejected. If the hypothesis is accepted, then we can make conclusions of it. If it's rejected by the results from our data analysis, we're going to end up forming another hypothesis to do another experimentation process. So once we form this conclusion through the results that supports the hypothesis, or end up forming conclusions that reject our hypothesis, this conclusion will then therefore might undergo other scientific scrutiny by fellow peers to see whether or not if our hypothesis was correct by further testing. So within the experiment itself, we want to have a couple, definitely we want a control group. And what a control group is just that there's these testing conditions that is not given to the control group so that it could be compared to those of the experimental group, which undergoes those testing conditions or variables. So the experimental group, like I said, undergoes some certain testing conditions or variables. And like this mice here, these are baby mice that are normal baby mice. And so this will therefore be our control group. Well, here we have these fluorescent baby mice here that has a fluorescent gene integrated into their DNA. And then they end up producing this fluorescent emitting fluorescent light due to that gene. And so therefore this is the experimental group because the part of the DNA is embedded with the fluorescent gene in it, while these weren't embedded with the fluorescent gene. I want to also talk a little bit about theories, just because it's a misnomer in how we use it in everyday language of what a theory is. Usually when people say a theory in everyday language, it's more like a guess or a hypothesis. But in the scientific community, a theory is actually supported by several experiments, so it has a lot of backing behind it. Here are the pictures that I ended up using. And some acknowledgments as well for all the help I've got through this. Alright, that's it.